Representation matters. But as indigenous Chicano people, we can't just sit back and wait for mainstream media outlets to make it happen for us. And nor should we. We started the Tales from Aztlantis podcast because we believe that it is imperative for Chicanos, Chicanas, and Chicanx people to produce our own media and tell our own stories. And the way we choose to do this is by using Buzzsprout to host the podcast. Buzzsprout is by far the easiest and best way to launch a professional podcast. You'll get a podcast website, audio players that you can drop into other websites, detailed analytics to see how people are listening, tools to promote your episodes, and much more. To start your own podcast and get a $20 Amazon gift card, follow the link in the show notes. This lets Buzzsprout know that we sent you and helps support the show. Buzzsprout, the easiest way to start a podcast. Now, on with the show.
Lord, we give you Kurly. Try not to piss him off.
Piali no chime, this is Kurly Tlapoyawa, co-host of the Tales from Aztlantis podcast, and this is a dispatch from Aztlantis. When we first conceived of the dispatches from Aztlantis, we figured that they would be a cool way for my co-host Tlakatekatl and I to just sort of jump online and respond to, current events, things that were going on in the news. And Ruben did a couple of them for the first season, but then we sort of got busy with everything and we stopped doing them entirely. In fact, I never did one. This is my first dispatch from Aztlantis. So the plan here with season 2 as we go forward is to start doing these a lot more frequently and to provide them as bonus content. So if you are a Patreon supporter, then thank you. And this is going to be one of the many ways that you can enjoy being a premium member is by getting these bonus episodes of dispatches from Aztlantis. So today or tonight, I wanted to talk about an article that I saw about a week or two ago. And if you follow me on Twitter, then you saw me referencing this article. It was published on the Minority News Network, which I had never heard of before this, April 28th, 2022. And it is a article by one Daniel Cano. And the article is entitled, "Where Are the Chicano Intellectuals?" And I thought it was pretty good because what the article mainly touches on is that Chicanos and Mexican Americans are left out of the national dialogue, like completely when it comes to mainstream media news outlets. Basically, Mexican American and Chicano thinkers are ignored by, the mainstream news. We just don't seem to matter. And this really hits home for me because I keep seeing these headlines in the mainstream news, on CNN or NBC or Yahoo or New York Times or whatever. And the headlines will always, reference Latinos. And it's funny because the first instinct I have when I see a headline talking about Latinos or using that word, Latin or any of its variations, right? Latino, Latina, Latinx. The first thing that I think of is, I wonder whose identity is being erased with this headline. Whose cultural inheritance is being erased and ignored with this headline through the use of that word. Because, the word it's a racist, gross, colonialist term. And if you're a listener to the podcast, then we've covered this before, but, basically Latin, the whole idea of a Latin America and of Latinos, this was invented in the 1860s by a French intellectual named Michel Chevalier. And basically, he wanted to come up with a term, a blanket term that could be used to appeal to Mexicans, because the French had this, imperialist fantasy. They had this project of imperialism that they wanted to insert themselves into Mexico. And they figured, well, if we could get the Mexicans to see themselves as our Latin, quote unquote, brethren, then they would be more open to siding with us and not allying themselves with, the Anglophone world, because we're coming at it as Latins and they are also Latin people. And so Michel Chevalier came up with this idea and he pitched it to Napoleon. I forget which Napoleon it was, but they were down with it. And now, 2022, we're still dealing with the fallout of this French imperialism, this French imperialist project that resulted in the invention of Latinos and Latinas. And by design, the word was meant to supplant Mexican identity and replace it with one more in line with, French desires. So the word is extremely problematic, as the kids like to say. The word deliberately erases people of indigenous and African origin, and it prioritizes whiteness. That's the entire intent of this word. So when I see these news headlines using this word, I'm always prompted to Google, what's actually going on and try to find out whose identity is being erased and what those identities actually are. And so, for example, looking at NBC News here, the headline is "Political Cartoonist Lalo Alcaraz Becomes the First Latino to Win Prestigious Prize." And props to Lalo. He's a friend of mine. Congratulations, homie. This is awesome. He won the 2022 Herblock Prize for editorial cartooning. This is a huge deal. But what it does is it erases the fact that he's a Chicano. So you're seeing this erasure of Chicanos and Mexican Americans from the national dialogue. And we're just kind of being supplanted by this generic colonialist Latino identity. So this is just, one example of that. And then a while back, people were sharing this article. This is from yahoo.com. And the headline reads, "A year ago, they were picking fruit with their dad. Today, they're the hottest act in Latin music." And so, of course, I'm like, well, who are they talking about? So I jumped on and I Googled it, and I found out about this really great band. I found out about 15-year-old Yaritza Martinez, and who's a singer, songwriter, and guitarist for her sibling trio, Yaritza y su Esencia. And, going through the article, it come to find out that one of the siblings was born in Michoacan, the same place that their parents were born, while the other two siblings, Jairo and Yaritza, were born and raised in Yakima. So here we see this further erasing of, Mexicanos and Chicanos and Mexican Americans through the use of this word Latino. But probably the one that pissed me off the most was this announcement that Harvard Law Review just had their first Latina president. So this is a big deal, right? And much respect to Priscilla Coronado, who, is now the president of the Harvard Law Review. That's huge. That's a big deal. But then again, I see this, well, Latino, what the hell does that even mean? It's like such a nonsensical word. It tells us nothing about this individual. So you jump online and you start scrolling around, Googling, and you find out that sure enough, she's the youngest daughter of two Mexican immigrants. So again, this entire erasing of Mexicans, Mexicanos, Mexican Americans, Chicanos from the national narrative, just from the dialogue that's happening in this country, we get left out. And it's not just Chicanos and Mexican Americans and Mexicanos. It's all the other people who get, grouped up in this gross, homogenizing term, And I guess that's just the main point of this dispatch from Aztlantis is I'm imploring you, if you are a journalist, if you're a writer, if you have a TV show, if you have a podcast, if you're somebody out there telling the stories of our people, don't be afraid. Just say the word. You can say Chicano. You can say Mexican American. You could say Mexican. These are not dirty words. We don't have to hide who we are. And when we see the mainstream media outlets erasing us by calling us Latinos and Latinas and Latinx in their stories, we need to be vocal about it. You know, and I laugh because on social media, every time I see one of these headlines, I always pipe in, right? And I always state my case. And you know, sure enough, it starts to piss people off because they'll respond. I remember once somebody responded with, "Oh yeah, okay, man, we get it." And I'm like, well, I don't think you do. I don't think you get it, because if we got it, we wouldn't keep doing this. So, thank you for listening to my rant. This has been a dispatch from Aztlantis. I am your host, Kurly Tlapoyawa, and I hope you found this informative, if not entertaining. I'll see you around. Timoitase.
One thing. Just one thing.
And what's that?
I have no idea. But ask Curly, because he seems to know.
Curly knows the secret of life?
Yeah. I'm going to invite him over. I mean, he's a very interesting guy. You'll see.
Thank you for listening to Tales from Aztlantis, a project of the Chimali Institute of Mesoamerican Arts. If you enjoy the show, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. You can do this by visiting talesfromaztlantis.com and clicking Support the Podcast. Your continued support will help keep the podcast ad-free and independent. Until next time, Timoitase.